and welcome back to another episode here at The Damage Report. Very thrilled to launch into a legal-focused episode of the show with one of our favorite guests. Adrienne Lawrence returns. Adrienne, how's it going?
Hey, it's pretty good. As good as can be.
As good as can be. But yeah, we're moving along. We're hoping to get back to normal. I don't know, everybody says that, but that still implies that normal was good.
Exactly.
Like everybody's just trying to get back to where they were at. Maybe we could aim for better. But anyway, thank you for being here. Excited to get your take on a lot of news stories that are going around, including we'll be talking about Joe Biden's marginally shifted stance on what's going on between Israel and Palestine, a new challenge to Roe v. Wade that's worked its way up to the Supreme Court, the path that the Republican Party is going to take and what their base thinks about it, and Devin Nunes. It's like save the cheerleader, save the world for the right wing. They just want to stop Devin Nunes from being mocked on Twitter. That's like the most important thing to them. And so we're gonna talk about the lengths that they went to. And then if there's time to close out the show, the political question that is sweeping our nation: what animal could you beat in a fight and why? No, but really there's a poll and we're gonna talk a little bit about it because I think it says something about American men. Anyway, thank you everybody for being here, regardless of what platform you're on. Please hit the like button, share the stream so that people know that we're live. And as we go through this, if you wanna send us tweets, comments, super chats, things like that, we'll respond and see what's going on there. By the way, right after the Damage Report today, you can stay tuned, stay at twitch.tv/TYT for a special episode of Deep Dive with Jordan Ewell and Mariah Kaplan of If Not Now. Gonna be joining Jordan on Deep Dive immediately after the show. So that'll be available at twitch.tv/TYT just very shortly after the Damage Report. So lots to look forward to. And with that, Adrienne, are you ready to launch into this thing?
Yeah, let's get it.
Okay, everybody's excited to talk about the devastation being wrought in Palestine. Okay, we have been wondering when Joe Biden would do something about what's going on in Palestine. The more than 200 Palestinians who've died, the more than 50 children who've been killed. He is, after all, the leader of the free world and a guy who says he's gonna help us get back our soul. Well, he did kind of a little bit more than he did earlier. He spoke by phone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday. And after that, they put out a carefully worded statement saying that the president, quote, expressed support for a ceasefire. And so we were gonna say that, and then we're gonna launch into the commentary. But I thought, no, we need to read the actual statement. It's gonna take a minute, but this is the actual statement that was put out by the White House after that conversation, saying the president spoke today with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. The president reiterated his firm support for Israel's right to defend itself against indiscriminate rocket attacks. So right off the bat, it's framed as focused on Israeli self-defense. That is the main topic. The president welcomed efforts to address intercommunal violence and to bring calm to Jerusalem. He encouraged Israel to make every effort to ensure the protection of innocent civilians. The two leaders discussed progress in Israel's military operations against Hamas and other terrorist groups in Gaza. The president expressed his support for a ceasefire and discussed US engagement with Egypt and other partners towards that end. The two leaders agreed that they and their teams would remain in close touch. So, Adrienne, what are your thoughts on this official White House statement?
Well, for official statements, it seemed very lax and passive. It's really interesting to see Biden have no issue taking the fury and calling Putin a murderer. But in this circumstance, it seems like, you know what, I'd support a ceasefire as opposed to, you need to stop, it's not okay, these are human rights violations. You'd expect that if Biden, who expects to be and wants to create this whole human rights legacy for the United States and take this stance, would actually take a stance and be more aggressive.
Yeah, it's so, you're totally right, passive. We have no power, we have no influence. I can merely express preferences, I suppose. Like, we give them billions of dollars in military aid. Now, does that actually buy the leverage to change their policy? I don't know, but I do know that we're not testing that hypothesis. We're not trying to find out. We're just expressing support, as if it's like the exact same sentiment as me tweeting Marvel to release Black Widow earlier. I mean, I don't have no control over the process, but I'd be cool with it. No, you're the president. They take billions of dollars in aid. They buy billions of dollars of weapons from us. That does provide leverage. That leverage should be worth something. And what is more valuable than stopping hundreds more innocent civilians from being killed? But it goes even a little bit beyond that, because the closest this got to actually recognizing the horror of so many civilians once again being killed is he encouraged Israel to make every effort to ensure the protection of innocent civilians. And they talked about indiscriminate rocket attacks. They did not talk about indiscriminate bombings or indiscriminate missile strikes or entire residential buildings being destroyed or the apparent systematic weeding out of all media headquarters in Gaza or the destruction of their only coronavirus testing lab or the fact that they were bombing homes in refugee camps. None of that is indiscriminate. The only thing that's indiscriminate is rocket attacks. And the civilian deaths are very much at arm's length. It's very abstract. If you could do something to stop it, we would be down for that. It is so passive, so weak. Like he obviously he's wanted to be president for decades, Adrienne, but in this particular case, he does not see that as a position that should come with any sort of expectation that leadership will actually be demonstrated.
No, not at all. And the thing is, you think of anyone that it would be Biden because he is trying to craft this human rights push. And this is the exact test that he gets. And what does he do? He punts. It's so incredibly demoralizing, this thought that, hey, maybe we are on the cusp of change, especially when you see so many other nations and people in various walks of life rising up to speak against these human rights violations. This was a time where we got to show leadership, where we actually got to show strength as a nation, as a true world power. And what do? No, we're just like, if you did, that'd be great.
Yeah, and we have to bear in mind, by the way, we have been trying throughout this multi-week episode to point out the context of where America has generally stood in these topics, what effect it has on the UN and on the Security Council, and its own corrupting financial interests. So bear in mind, as we talked about yesterday, the Biden administration first notified Congress of a proposed $735 million weapons sale on May 5th, just days before the latest Israeli bombardment of Gaza began. That is ongoing. They're still trying to do that. No word yet on whether weapons will be sold to the people of Gaza to defend themselves. They don't have any sort of right to self-defense. But so we are telling them it would be best if there was a ceasefire, while knowing that we're trying to sell them more weapons. In fact, more bombs exactly like the ones that they're trying to use right now. And I wanted to give credit to Francesca Fiorentini, who co-hosted with me yesterday, who tweeted, Biden to Netanyahu, here's all the missiles I'd like you to stop dropping. Like, that is a massive conflict of interest. Like, imagine having a sit down, a heart to heart with your friend and being like, dude, I'm not gonna pressure you, but it's a bit much with the drugs. I would fully support you cutting back on the drugs. Now, would you like to buy some drugs for me? There's something obviously wrong with that, Adrienne. But in this case, it is a very open question at this point of whether that arms sale is going to be able to be stopped. Gregory Meeks is gonna try to put a hold on it. But right now, there's only 15 days that effectively it can be stopped. Are there enough people in Congress that would be willing to do that, considering the situation right now? It doesn't immediately seem to me like that is necessarily true.
No, not at all. It is really incongruent with who we claim that we are, and it's absolutely absurd and ridiculous. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if it does go through, just because the hypocrisy under which we operate, it just seems to be never ending.
100%.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be. Featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity, the UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, "You must unlearn what you have learned." And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFDR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
Some are pushing for the US to put a pause on weapons sales to the Israeli government while the murder of civilians is ongoing. And I wanted to give special credit to Representative Ilhan Omar, who put out this statement saying, "It would be appalling for the Biden administration to go through with $735 million in precision-guided weaponry to Netanyahu without any strings attached in the wake of escalating violence and attacks on civilians. If this goes through, this will be seen as a green light for continued escalation and will undercut any attempts at brokering a ceasefire." I think that read, that selling the weapons will be seen as a green light, is exactly right. And by the way, it also brings up yet another form of leverage that we have. He could, on that conversation with Netanyahu, say, hey, by the way, unless there's an immediate halting to the bombs, we're not gonna sell you anymore. Not now, not in the future. That is leverage that we have that we are, again, willingly not using. We are setting it aside, just continue the money, continue the arms sales. It's pathetic, especially considering how many people are dying while Biden is trying to very carefully figure out exactly what he will be allowed to say and what he won't.
Yep, absolutely. And I love the fact that we're still in a pandemic. So on top of that, this thought that not only are people losing their lives, but they're exposing one another to more life lost. And just the thought that we are supposed to be out here protecting and saving human lives coming out of a pandemic. And what are we doing? Allowing more lives to be needlessly taken. It's it's astonishing.
Exactly, yeah, as you say, during a pandemic. And like we said, the one clinic capable of doing coronavirus testing has at the very least been significantly damaged. There was already obviously the blockade that's been going on for many years. But now even some trucks that were able to come in and provide things like fuel and medical supplies to NGOs, those have also been halted, with the Israeli military saying that it's necessary to stop acts of terrorism targeting the trucks. That is very convenient, but it does mean that even less aid and energy and those sorts of things will be coming into an area that has already historically had a hard time getting it. That said, I want to read just a little bit more from Representative Omar's press release. She said, "We should be standing unequivocally and consistently on the side of human rights, holding all state and non-state actors accountable for their crimes, and using every tool at our disposal to end the violence and bring about peace. We should be affirming the right of all people, regardless of their faith, to have self-determination and equal rights. That includes both Israelis and Palestinians, because yes, Palestinian lives matter." And Representative Rashida Tlaib, who has given some great speeches about this, sort of forcing people to reckon with what's happening there in a way that in past Congresses we would not have had, said no more weapons to kill children and families, Joe Biden, enough. And that's great that we have these people that are taking this stance, but we are going to wait and see if it's actually enough. If people like Rashida Tlaib and Ayanna Pressley and AOC and others will actually be able to stop this. Just imagine, though that arms sale going through, it would be bad enough absent the conflict, because you would obviously worry what could someday be done with those weapons. But that would just be going to reload the conflict that's currently ongoing, that has already killed so many children specifically. Any other thoughts?
Nothing in particular. I just am really proud of these individuals standing up and using their voice, because they are rallying our citizens here in the United States, as well as other people around the world, to continue to use their voice and uplift the fact that Palestinian lives do matter. And so by doing that, I think that hopefully that'll be enough pressure on Biden and other members in Congress to stop selling arms to Israel, but also to put some pressure on them, because it's not okay.
Yeah, and by the way, really fast, just one final thought. Joe Biden came in and immediately, at least in some ways, not as much as initially it seemed like, changed our relationship with Saudi Arabia in terms of our willingness to support their war on the people of Yemen. We are at least temporarily cutting back on planned weapon sales because those weapons were used to kill civilians. It just happened. He came in, he did it very quickly. In this case, though, no, can't do it. We gotta think about it. Let's not be too hasty. It's really interesting how those two situations are so fundamentally different in Joe Biden's belief in his own power. The Supreme Court has announced that they are going to be taking up an abortion case, thus opening up the possibility that this new, even more conservative Supreme Court could fundamentally reconfigure the Supreme Court's stance on reproductive rights. This particular case that they're going to be considering concerns a law enacted in 2018 by the Republican-dominated Mississippi legislature that banned abortions if, quote, the probable gestational age of the unborn human was determined to be more than 15 weeks. The statute includes narrow exceptions for medical emergencies or a, quote, severe fetal abnormality. And the state effectively is arguing that fetal viability, defined by the Roe Court as the capability of meaningful life outside of the mother's womb, shouldn't be the standard for allowing states to ban abortion, saying lawmakers had legitimate interest in protecting fetal life from the outset. By 15 weeks, the human fetus has made important physiological developments and abortions are riskier to the mother, according, very importantly, to the state. So we have got more details on this and the path that it took to getting to the Supreme Court. But Adrienne, I am very curious about what your reaction was when you saw that the Supreme Court was going to be taking up this case.
Well, I was not shocked at all. We saw a lot of states passing laws that were really kind of gutting abortion laws and also gutting Roe v. Wade during the Trump era for a reason, because they knew that he was crafting the Supreme Court to be a majority conservative court. And thus, by passing these laws that pretty much conflict entirely with Roe, that was a way that they could get it up through the courts, get it ultimately before these 9 justices, and hopefully, in their thoughts, really tear apart Roe v. Wade and force women to not really have a right to abortion. And so this really was coming. This is exactly what happens when you neglect the judiciary and allow Republicans to run amok.
Exactly. I am curious though. I mean, look, this is, I guess, what we've been waiting for, what we've been wondering ever since Amy Coney Barrett got on the Supreme Court. I mean, even before Amy Coney Barrett, but it seemed like they were a little bit hesitant pre-Amy Coney Barrett, but now she's gonna be there. So they have been very clear, the Supreme Court, for a very long time that these sorts of bans are not acceptable. So if they change that, do you have any idea of how they're gonna justify it, or are we beyond justifications at this point? Is it like with Mitch McConnell getting Amy Coney Barrett on the court? Is it just, we've got the numbers, we've got the power, we're gonna do what we want?
We got the numbers, we got the power, we're gonna do what we want. That's exactly what's gonna happen here. As we've seen recently with the US Supreme Court, the decisions that they've made have really flown in the face of precedent and have made that hard left that has absolutely nothing that is consistent with the line of cases. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they took that exact approach here when it comes to this case in particular. The fact is that we have people who are on the bench who are predominantly conservative, the majority is, and they want to change the laws. They want to change the tenor and everything that our country has worked toward, and they will do it by means necessary. So whether it is outright completely overturning Roe and saying we're in a whole new era, the will of the people, et cetera, or if it's by acting like Roe and pretty much all the cases that came after that don't exist, they'll do it. And they'll do it with a swipe of a pen. That's all. It'll be easy for them.
And so this particular case involves a sort of timeline of 15 weeks. So if they, and by the way, the fact that they've taken it up seems to indicate, as everyone is pointing out, that there seems to be enough justices who are willing to potentially change this. I doubt that 5 are picking it up because they just want to remind the nation of where they stand and what the precedent is. But so if they accept the state's argument, which is fetal viability is absolute BS, go away with that. We have other interests in protecting fetal life, which just basically means we don't like abortion. That's literally all that means. So is it possible that they would draw a new line at 14 weeks or at 12 weeks or at 10 weeks? Or is this really about fundamentally whether viability means anything anymore from the SCOTUS's point of view?
Oh no, they could very much draw the line at a different set of weeks. Initially when Roe came out, they were operating on the trimester system, where they said, during the first trimester that states could not restrict in any way a right to abortion, and second trimester, et cetera. So they could create these hard lines. The problem is that when it comes to an individual's body and determining when you're pregnant, it's not as clear. And most people don't know they're pregnant until pretty far in terms of weeks. So to put someone in that position where they have to make that determination so immediate and clear after impregnation, it's problematic because people can't necessarily make that decision so quickly. And also the right to decide how to govern your body is so incredibly important for autonomy. And that is what really that this majority conservative leaning court is looking to take away from women, to put us in a handmaid's tale situation. And it is no shocker that this case comes out of Mississippi.
Yeah, so I'm curious, do you think, obviously you seem pessimistic about Roe surviving its current form past this. And by the way, they would pick it up around October. We'd have a decision supposedly sometime next year. Do you think that it is likely to just result in a sort of dialing back or providing a little bit more freedom to states to regulate that then, obviously a lot of Republican states would immediately jump on and they would push even further? What do you think the odds are that this ends up being just Roe's gone? We're done with that. We're actually totally getting rid of it. Or do you think that's still a step too far?
I think that they're either going to roll back Roe and its progeny, including like Casey, which Breyer wrote that opinion, and Breyer has been very staunch in his position and advocating for abortion rights, or they are going to go ahead and give states the rights. And that's going to be really, really, really an issue because we do have a lot of states, particularly those running on the South and somewhat in the Midwest, in terms of limiting the rights of women. For instance, this case here in Mississippi was brought by their sole abortion clinic. They only had one in the entire state to service Mississippi. And I'd really love to talk about Mississippi quickly, just because there are so many greater issues there where they rank 43rd in education, 50th in healthcare, 49th in economy, 44th in opportunity, 48th in infrastructure. Like Mississippi is bottom of the barrel, and what they're focusing on is let's make sure that women don't have control, or people I should say, don't have control over their bodies and are forced to reproduce. Like Mississippi has bigger problems, and clearly those problems are associated with how it's treating its people. And in this situation, it is forcing to oppress them. And if other states have those same opportunities, we're likely going to see those states continue to also go down in the rankings and to considerably see more struggle and oppression.
Yeah, there's a cost to, I guess a system where politicians just distract their base with stuff that doesn't fundamentally have anything to do with their life. That even, I understand some might hear that and say, well, you don't understand, you damn lib. This is something we care about. This is our religion or whatever. But it's basically banned already there. It might as well be effectively in some of these states that have one clinic that you have to drive multiple hours, that if you're under a certain age, you have to get your probably fundamentalist religious parents to sign on to it, or you need to go and you need to talk to them, and then you need to go back the next day, so you have to drive twice across the state. It's already it is pretty banned at this point. And Adrienne rightfully points out so many other issues that do need to be solved, that state governments should have some sort of moral or ethical requirement to actually take seriously, but they don't. And apparently they can get away. They can get away with it because they've convinced their base that this is more important. And that's all they need to deliver. It's not like Mississippi is on the verge of Democrats taking over because Republicans haven't been addressing the issues that you're talking about. Apparently enough Republicans either don't seem to be hurting or have been trained to ignore the pain, in pursuit of these sorts of ideological goals.
Yep, and I just really don't see the legitimacy in forcing someone who lives in a state that's ranked 49th in the nation to be forced to bring a life into that state and to try to take care of them when clearly the resources, the infrastructure, the opportunities are not there. That just seems cruel.
There is this debate right now about Breyer. So the retirement thing. Obviously, people are, they feel burned by what ended up happening with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was, of course, replaced in 3.5 minutes by Republicans choosing a combination of the craziest person and the youngest person that they could find in Amy Coney Barrett. And so what do you think about that, Adrienne, about those arguments? Apparently, Breyer had written something earlier that seemed to indicate that he would not be in favor of pressure being applied to try to get sort of politically timed retirements. What do you think about the stakes here and what he's likely to do?
I think arrogance is a hell of a drug, and some people definitely are more arrogant than others. I do understand that our laws are written such that these Supreme Court justices can serve for life, and some of them intend to die in their position, and Breyer may just be one of them. And we could continue to see, as a result of that, more of the court become a majority conservative even further, which is why we need to expand. We need to go from 9 to 13. And you know what? It really puts the onus on our legislature to do something if they want to make some change. Make it happen. That is your job. If the system is supposed to work, do something. Don't put it on Breyer necessarily, even though it'd be great if he got up off the spot.
Yeah, I have so few hopes for something as fundamental as perceived to be radical as remaking the court at this point. Like, I don't know that they're going to pass an infrastructure bill. I don't know if they're going to do literally anything. But obviously the fear is it's a 50-50 Supreme Court, or sorry, it's 50-50 Senate. It's the one thing that they can get past the automatic filibuster. But one Democratic senator, tragically getting COVID or something like that, and the Republicans would take over. I assume I know the answer to this question, but last time around under Obama, it was no Supreme Court justice nominations in the last year. If Manchin were to drop out or whatever, and Breyer had to retire tomorrow, do you think that Biden would be able to get a Supreme Court justice in his first year?
I'd like to hope so. I'd like to hope so. I'd like to hope so, but I think that person would have to be more down the middle.
A Republican, basically.
Yeah.
Maybe he'd be able to get a Republican. Okay, yeah, well, we'll see. We have been watching the Republican Party, I was gonna say adapt to what happened last November, but that's not really what they're doing. They are reacting though, in states around the country. They are cracking down on people's ability to vote, to be a part of the political system, while pretending that Donald Trump, who lost epically, who lost repeatedly, who lost pretty much everything, secretly won. So what do the people think about this? What do Republican voters actually think about the way that the Republican Party has responded to what happened in November and in those special elections in Georgia? Well, there's a recent poll by CBS News YouGov, and it asked them about two different paths that the Republican Party could potentially take. So one is to focus on the message. And the actual text that was given to respondents was, the party needs more people to vote Republican, so it should tell the public about popular policies and ideas and will win if more people hear about them. What I would refer to as politics. So that's one path. The other path is the rules. And the text was, the party already has plenty of voters, so it should push for changes to voting rules in the states and districts to ensure fairness, and will win once those changes are in place. So to be fair, they don't say in the poll they should really change the rules so less people vote. They try to make it a little bit more appealing. They used a version of the BS narrative that's being pushed by Republicans, that it's about fairness and not, dear God, people voted, we gotta stop this. Well, when given those two choices between the message and the rules, nearly half of Republicans, 47%, chose the latter option. Just 53% preferred a strategy more focused on the GOP's message. So look, that is basically split, basically 50-50. But it is 50-50 between say things that are popular so people will like you and you'll deliver as a responsible political party, and just change the rules. You're good. You don't need to change anything. The party that lost Congress, that lost the Senate, that lost the presidency doesn't need to change anything. They just need to change the rules. Adrienne, what do you think about this?
Oh, this is so in line with kind of what the Republicans have been doing. They would rather, not cater to people's needs and actually serve constituents, but let me go ahead and suppress others from voting. They are so incredibly corrupt. This is wild.
Yeah, and I mean, I wish that you could somehow separate out all of what like Fox News and the Republican Party and Trump has been doing. Like if you just had the election and then there's none of all that, and then you just really sit down with the Republicans and ask, do you think that they need to change it anyway? So right now we don't have that. We have something that is muddled with Donald Trump's insane comments, and we'll get to a couple of those. What Fox News has been saying, they have been trained to believe falsely that elections are fraudulent all over the country. But that said, like, imagine thinking that your party doesn't need to change. Like, you know what I thought after 2016 when the Democrats lost? They suck and they need to do better. And you know what I thought in 2020 when they won? They suck and they need to do better. Like all parties should be trying to deliver more for the American people. And the evidence for that, I would say, is the fact that people are suffering, that America has tons of problems. To be able to look out and say, no, you guys don't need to change anything. You're doing everything right. Like the Republicans, they presided over the pandemic, the huge economic problems. We've got so many issues, Adrienne, and apparently 47% of Republicans think, nah, they're nailing it. We don't need to do anything right now.
Oh, of course, because if we can just fearmonger more and really ramp it up and suppress the vote, I think that we can continue to stay in power. Like that would be amazing. This is completely and totally irrational and really kind of maniacal. The fact is that a lot of people left the Republican Party. The New York Times, they did a voting records analysis earlier this year, and they found that nearly 150,000 people had quit the party, and that's in 25 states, even though they don't collect data in 19 of those states. And it really says something about the future of the party. But the unfortunate problem is that our issues run so deep in terms of our isms and keeping people divided that fear mongering in addition to suppression may actually work.
Yeah, maybe. It is easy to point to Republicans these days and say, you guys are crazy. Biden won, you need to accept it. Why are you believing these insane lies from people like Linwood and Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump that have had this horrendous track record in the legal system? That said, is it really about Republicans? Is it really about 2020? Or is this just a thing that happens? After every election, people question the legitimacy. Well, let's take a look back at some past elections and see what we can learn. So if you bring up this poll, you're gonna see from right on to the left, going back past elections to see what percentage of the parties view the president as illegitimate. So you can see there that Biden is viewed as illegitimate by Republicans. Something like 70% or 67% say that he's fundamentally illegitimate. So that is true, but we have had some Republican presidents too. So Donald Trump, following the 2016 election, 56% of Democrats felt that he was illegitimate. And in fact, under George W. Bush, following the 2000 election, 64% of Democrats believed that he was illegitimate. That number is actually not that far off some of the polls about Biden today. Now, obviously, I have some thoughts about this, but I think that this is an important exercise just to make sure that we're not too much in a bubble. Adrienne, based on what you're seeing here, do you think that this is less a sort of once in a lifetime collective hallucination on the Republican part, or is this just a cycle that we go through? Whoever wins, a lot of people are gonna think that it wasn't fair.
I actually don't think that there were issues in terms of thinking things were as unfair as we do now. Because we saw close elections before, Bush v. Gore, and that did definitely have tinges of unfairness given the Florida Jeb Bush connection. But at the same time, I think there was still a lot of faith in our democracy to a certain extent. But now I do think that it's been revved up in terms of propaganda, and we're on a whole new level where people they really don't have any faith in the system, and that they are riding high on these conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I think there's something here, but I think there are some important distinctions that we should bear in mind. So first of all, let's acknowledge that both George W. Bush and Trump won less votes. Now, that does not mean that they're illegitimate constitutionally. Unfortunately, our system sucks. That's one of the ways that it sucks. But you can sort of understand how that would bother people. That in an election, the guy who gets less votes somehow wins, and always when you're a Republican, oddly enough. Also, with Trump, like illegitimate can mean a lot of things. I would assume that 56% of Democrats weren't saying he stole the election, especially because what power did he have to steal the election in 2016? He's not the incumbent president. He didn't control all of these offices. I feel like some might be saying this guy is insane. I think that he is beneath the dignity of any elected office in a very long time, in a lot of different ways. Now that's me speculating, but I believe that might be part of it. With George W. Bush, the Supreme Court gave him the election. Now that may be allowed, that may be constitutional, but I feel like if you're gonna claim that an election is illegitimate, one in which the Supreme Court had to get involved to choose winners and losers, seems like one where maybe we could allow a little bit of concern over that election. Bearing in mind that, as Adrienne pointed out, if there's evidence, I'm not seeing it, that either of those in 2016 or 2000 were accompanied by this Republican president is illegitimate because all elections are BS and stolen, which is effectively what many Republican voters and politicians are saying now, that all of these states were cheating. They were cheating even if they were controlled by Republicans. For some reason, these Republican states cheated to give Trump the election. And by the way, when George W. Bush became president, Gore conceded. And he did not spend the next few years furiously tweeting that Bush was that it was the biggest crime of the century and all that, which we'll turn to. Hillary Clinton obviously had a lot of problems and continues to have a lot of problems. She does occasionally talk about Trump, but she didn't go around saying that every election was BS now and none of it counts. And I feel like, Adrienne, that's pretty important context.
Yep, absolutely. We don't have people undermining and continue to reinforce this and then having that propaganda being spread en masse. I do think we're at a whole different level, especially with people coming out of a pandemic where they were questioning what's real, what's not real, where's our future. There was so much uncertainty where people are now latching on to these conspiracy theories, and they are rife. And so I think that this is just a different level, and I don't know if we can come back from that. But also, when we live in a nation that doesn't push education and knowledge and having some analytical abilities, this is exactly what you get. They're easy to control.
Yeah, and the media environment is very different than it was back in 2000. I would say it's even different than it was in 2016. By the way, following 2000, look, I was really young, but I feel like there wasn't a huge thing where every Democrat was like, Gore's the best, I'm gonna be the next Gore. Or if Gore runs again, we're totally gonna support, everyone needs to support Gore. That wasn't really a thing. Maybe kind of a thing with Hillary, but most people didn't expect that she would run again. Whereas with Trump, they're all in lockstep with him, and he's entirely irresponsible, and he's not going away. So look, I apologize to the audience, I'm gonna do this to you, but the major difference that we're pointing out here is that there was no coordinated, with a political leader, movement to continue to delegitimize the fundamental foundation of democracy in America. Whereas right now, we have a guy whose tiny desk is sending messages like this. This is over the last couple days. As our country is being destroyed both inside and out, the presidential election of 2020 will go down as the crime of the century. And this was done purposefully. The polls were a joke. I won states in a landslide that I was predicted to lose days before the election. Other states had me purposefully so far down that it would force people, even fans, to say, let's stay home, darling. We love our president, but he can't win. That's what he's saying now, still. He lost months and months ago. He's collecting his pension as former president, but he's still telling people every day that democracy is fake, it's all made up, none of it counts. You should still vote for Republicans in a system that doesn't work anymore. But he is still stoking those fears constantly. And that, Adrienne, is really my fear.
Yep, and it's an absolute incredible problem because if people don't see the system in which they operate and that governs them as legitimate, they're more likely to push back against it and to engage in all sorts of criminality and criming. And as we saw on January 6th, like kind of that just seems to be maybe on the cusp of starting things, because we're going to have all sorts of melee if we do not have people who have faith in our entire system.
Agreed. Oh, Devin Nunes, what have you done? How cool of a guy must you be to receive so much protection from Republicans? So here is the news that we're going to discuss today. Newly revealed, New York Times, the Justice Department under President Trump secretly obtained a grand jury subpoena last year in an attempt to identify the person behind a Twitter account dedicated to mocking Representative Devin Nunes of California, according to a newly unsealed court document. So this is like, and by the way, this is not Devin Nunes' cow. This is a different account that mocks Devin Nunes on Twitter that also has been targeted by the former Trump administration. So Twitter appears to have immediately been suspicious about the legitimacy of the request because obviously the user of that account, the filing said, quote, appears to be engaged in clear First Amendment activity discussing stances on current events, government policies, and one elected official in particular, Congressman Nunes. They were so suspicious that when they pressed the Justice Department for an explanation, the filing said, the government said the subpoena was part of a criminal investigation into a possible violation of a federal statute that makes it a felony to use interstate communications to threaten to injure someone. But the government refused to point to any particular tweet that made a threat. And ultimately, the Justice Department withdrew the subpoena this spring after President Biden took office. This was, I believe, filed on November 24th. So Trump had lost re-election. He was trying to overthrow the US government, but still making time, or at least his Justice Department was, to try to unmask a rando on Twitter who was mocking Devin Nunes. Adrienne, is there anything to this? Their case about trying to stop someone from interstate blah, blah, blah. Is there anything there?
So I can't speak to whether there is something specifically there, but I can tell you my thoughts are no. That this was probably some kind of veiled effort to get information on someone so that they could potentially harass them or maybe shake something out of them. But this is something that's pretty scary in terms of Devin Nunes and co. and the Department of Justice abusing their power to try to pierce the veil of Twitter handles and figure out who people are. And as someone who's a licensed practitioner here in California, I can write subpoenas, I can issue subpoenas. And so a lot of us have the power to do that, but to have the Department of Justice use its power, you know what? We should be grateful that Twitter had its legal counsel willing to stand up to this and could use its resources, because otherwise we'd all be potentially in trouble.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't know that you had that power. I will tread more carefully in the future. But yeah, I just don't get it. Like, Twitter has people who mock other people. Some of them are the absolute worst, and at its worst, social media is a venue for people to fairly anonymously, without any consequences, send violent threats, rape threats, general unrelenting harassment. This account doesn't seem to be one of those. I looked over it. Like, yeah, post some messages about Nunes. And I would say, Nunes, maybe if you hadn't made such a big quest out of trying to stop the cow Twitter account from tweeting about you, you wouldn't have thus inspired so many other accounts to target you. I don't think that they get that that's how it works, that if you're in the public eye, some people are gonna harass you. Now, at times that harassment goes too far. And there are certainly ways that you could go beyond Twitter's terms of service. But if Twitter is saying this one didn't, it is very weird to deploy the power of the DOJ in pursuit of that. And I don't know, Adrienne, is this the sort of thing where it's pure speculation that Nunes would have had to talk to someone? Why would the DOJ, independent of Devin Nunes, have engaged in this?
So purely speculative. I think that maybe that account had tweeted out something that was too on point, maybe too accurate. And so the thought could have been that that was maybe a leak from the inside, or that person had too much information, and thus DOJ wanted to get their hands on them. And who knows, Devin Nunes could be used as a veil in this circumstance, since he already had that kind of Twitter dispute with the cow. So they might just be using that as a suggestion, but they actually are thinking, hey, no, we need to figure out who this person is and we need to do this now.
Yeah, interesting. Anyway, finally, a couple people reached for comment on this. Spokesman for Mr. Nunes did not respond to a request for comment. I feel like you should have to, kind of. Like, I just mean in terms of like the universe should force you. Like, this is pretty big, and you got nothing to say about it. Anyway, a different Devin Nunes did respond. This is Devin Nunes's alt mom, the actual account that was attempted to be unmasked by the DOJ, saying, "This is the closest thing I'm gonna get to a Mother's Day card." That's the sort of content that the Twitter account is putting out, and they tried to shut it down, or at least scare them away. Anyway, weird news. Bill Gates was recently announced would be getting a divorce from Melinda Gates. And pretty much every day since then, we have found out a lot of really bad information about Bill Gates, about things that he's said, things that he's done, and people that he's spent his time with. And so we're gonna try to cover a few little interesting, terrible tidbits of news. So first of all, Jeffrey Epstein reportedly gave advice to Bill Gates about ending his marriage with his now estranged wife, Melinda. During meetings the two had at the pedophile's Manhattan townhouse, Gates apparently used the gatherings at Epstein's $77 million townhouse as an escape from what he told Epstein was a toxic marriage, a topic both men found humorous. A person who attended the meetings told the Daily Beast, and doesn't that just send a shiver down your spine that Epstein thought that was a toxic relationship that Bill Gates was in. Adrienne, look, there's more that we'll get into, but when the first words in the graphic are Jeffrey Epstein, you know that it's going in a bad direction.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think that man is a judge of anything's toxicity one way or another. And I love this thought that, it was a toxic marriage. Is it like, what, Melinda wouldn't just let you sleep with whomever you wanted? Like, get out of here, go away.
That seems like the subtext of the toxicity, at least. So let me give you a few more details from this reporting. The people familiar with the matter said Gates found freedom in Epstein's lair, although others notably did not, where he met a rotating cast of bold-faced names and discussed worldly issues in between rounds of jokes and gossip, a men's club atmosphere that irritated Melinda. Score one for women's intuition in her evaluation of that men's club atmosphere that they had. During some of the meetings, Gates spoke to Epstein about possibly getting involved with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. A spokesperson for Bill Gates denied the allegations in a statement to the Daily Beast. So as far as I know, that's the extent of the allegations they're specifically denying, not that he had multiple meetings with this guy who turned out was an absolute monster. And notably, Donald Trump, remember his famous comment about Jeffrey Epstein that he likes the company of beautiful women, and he said something to the effect of, and younger ones, I've noticed, or something like that. Like there was something about Epstein that Donald Trump felt a little bit uncomfortable about, or at least he noticed that there was something about that guy. But Bill Gates, who was hanging out with him apparently years later after Donald Trump had stopped talking to Jeffrey Epstein, just had a great time with him, thought that he was a fun guy to joke around with and talk about his relationship with.
The thing is, the man had already been facing charges. So it's like Bill Gates has no question about who he is when it comes to Epstein, and the fact that he still wanted to spend time with him. He was consulting him, talking about what international issues, what international sex trade. Like, come on. It's like Bill Gates knew exactly who Epstein was, and yet he still decided to spend time with him. That would make you think, why? What about Epstein made Gates think that this man has something that he wants? And on top of that, it just, Gates is a really intelligent and very smart man. So that tells me he wasn't just oh my gosh, how did I get here? No, he knew better. He knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah. And to that end, we're gonna go into a couple of the other allegations, but really fast. Someone had the quote for me. Moose Loosely says he likes beautiful women almost as much as I do. Some tend to lean on the younger side. And I will just say, you can do your own independent research. We talked about in the past, but if Donald Trump thinks that the people you're attracted to are too young, I mean, that's like a guy who runs a foot fetish site being like, that dude loves toes. It's a bit much, honestly. But Bill Gates didn't notice anything wrong with this, apparently. Okay, so other allegations. On Sunday, the New York Times reported that Gates allegedly made advances on women who worked at Microsoft and his foundation while he was married to Melinda. The Journal followed up with its own report revealing that Gates resigned from Microsoft's board in 2020 amid an internal investigation into an alleged sexual relationship with a company engineer who came forward in late 2019. And Adrienne, what I've noticed, and obviously you are among other things that you're an expert on, exactly situations like this, the reporting about Gates seems to fall into the, hey, he was just kind of awkward. Like he's a nerd. He didn't realize what he was doing was wrong. What do you think about that? Is that a fair assessment?
No, not at all. This is a trend that we often see in media when it comes to wealthy, prominent men, generally white, involved in some kind of sexual misconduct. Media will kind of portray it as the, oh shucks, he didn't know better. Oh, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. Oops. And it's unfortunate because that is really taking away the power of the person in terms of they knew what they were doing and their responsibility and accountability for their actions. And that needs to change because, again, Bill Gates is a very smart man. If he was pursuing a subordinate, that's abuse of power, putting that individual in a position where they have to decide between, maintaining their economic independence and maybe possibly entering a sexual relationship with their superior who gets to dictate whether they move up in their profession or the trajectory of their career.
Exactly. And that should be so obvious. You're Bill Gates. Oh, poor you. You don't get to hit on your engineers. There are I've looked into it. There are people who don't work for you, who don't whose future career is not dependent on whether you give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. There's so many other people, and you're rich. Like you can fly to other places to find people if you want to. Like all of these are options that are available to you, but they seem to prefer this sort of predatory, like this is an area. It's kind of a prison. I've got power over you. I'm going to use that. And by the way, I know some people have been saying a lot of this information does seem to be coming out right after they announced they're being separated. Maybe this is just Melinda trying to hurt him. Okay, maybe, but that is not the same thing as the information not being true. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh no, of course. No, this is a product of the fact that they're in divorce negotiations. And so I'm sure, speculatively, that Melinda's attorneys and her PR team are connected. And because, hey, it's like, do you want these stories to stop coming out? Okay, well then you're gonna agree to my terms and what I want. Because clearly she's been keeping his secrets for quite some time. So hey, why not use them as leverage to make sure that I can walk away in good terms? And just something I'd love to say on the back of what you had just said in terms of these men essentially pursuing people in their own lair, it's like they're shooting fish in a barrel and then claiming to be bass masters. That's exactly what they're doing. It's a complete and total power play. And it's really very pathetic because you're absolutely right. They could go out in these streets and try to hustle and talk to anybody, but instead they decide to go to people who are in positions that are beneath them and who are afraid, and to some extent, to upsetting them because they might lose their economic independence if they reject them or turn them down.
That is a great point. I have not heard that expression before, but I am very much a fan of it. Cows. Of course there'd be cows. Okay, so I saw this poll going around on Twitter. I'm a big fan of YouGov. They do a lot of political polling. They also do a lot of polling of things that are very much not political, but that does not mean that we can't learn something about people through it. So YouGov asked a bunch of people, what animal could you beat in a fight? Compared to women, men feel most able to take on medium-sized dogs and geese. So you're seeing here on this chart, and it's available at YouGov, increasing percentage of both men and women feeling that they could take on animals. Starting off with, apparently people are more scared of a grizzly bear than a lion. I think it's pretty much a wash, all the way down to a rat. And Adrienne, there are a few notable things that stand out, including that there is a difference between men and women, with the only case where women feel more capable of taking out an animal is with a lion. 8% of women to 7% of men. Why specifically with the lion, do you think?
You know what? I didn't actually realize that, and I remember posting that that chart. I have no idea. Anybody who thinks that they can take on something that probably moves quicker than you, weighs more than you, I just no. It's a no for me. I have no idea.
Maybe it's like a. We've learned a lot about lions from movies like The Lion King, and like we all sort of get that like the male lion is the lazy one, it doesn't really do anything, and the women, maybe it's like I'll teach them just like the female lions do. Maybe, I don't know.
Yes, no. I'm just trying to say, let's not do this. Especially people, thinking that they can take an elephant?
How would that even work? Like the head of the NRA took like 4 shots to kill an elephant. You're not gonna punch it. You can't take a grizzly bear, you can't take a lion, you can't take an elephant. Gorilla, no, you can't take these animals, people. And I know some people, this is like the Joker thing. Some men just wanna watch the world burn. I get it, stop doing that. Polls are serious things and I wanna be able to believe the results. So answer them seriously. Don't say you can take a grizzly unless you really think you can take a grizzly. Now that said, Adrienne,
what?
Where do you cap out on this chart? Like starting at rat and moving up, what can you do?
I'm about at medium-sized dog. Like that's where I check out. The thing is, like I was mentioning, my one good move is going for the eyes. Like I just go straight for the eyes. I'm a gouger. And so I think that generally anything I can get around eye level with my hands, I think I could get it, regardless really of size. But at the same time, if it's just gotta be, knuck if you buck, it's gonna be a medium-sized dog.
Yeah.
I
just imagine that scene with the mountain and the viper, except to you and a goose. That's horrid.
What about you?
I guess I would say medium-sized dog, but I don't want to fight a medium-sized dog. I love medium-sized dogs.
Those are some of my favorite. It's either you or the dog. No. We're not gonna play like the yeller. No, it's time to throw down. It's you or the dog.
No, I think that I would just present my throat and being like, you're a good boy. Take it. Just take a chunk out of it. That's at a rat. I think I could take a rat. Now, one of the interesting things I saw really fast is the huge difference in king cobra responses. Men really do think they can take down a king cobra. Women are very, I think, honest about that. And basically, the main reason I wanted to show this chart is there's something wrong with American men. You're not taking any of these animals. You'd tap out from a cat. This is for most, like we're not made that way anymore. And it's perfectly fine. We don't need to be, but I think it's important to be honest with yourself about your capabilities. And this chart, more than almost anything else, proves to me that we are not. The Fight Club Dunning-Kruger up in here. Anyway, I am curious what all of you watching would answer though, and we have a simpler poll. So you can head to tyt.com/polls and you can see what animal could you beat in a fight. And we've given you a lot of options. You've got your goose, you've got your kangaroo, you've got your chimpanzee, it's sort of like a cousin fight. You've got your eagle, if you really want to stick it to America, your ostrich, if you can find it, it might be hiding, and a house cat. And let's see, I'm assuming that's sort of ranked, but anyway, we're gonna give you those responses tomorrow, so definitely stay tuned to Big News Wednesday. We'll give you the responses there. Mike Hawthorne says, oh nope, geese and ducks are mean critters. Yeah, so look, I should have gotten into that. Everybody says that about geese. I get it. So phase 1 is people in ignorance asserting that they could totally drop kick a goose because they don't know what geese are about. Stage 2 is, wait, are geese the real deal? Is the GNOG for geese? And then you watch some videos and they will chase you and they will peck. But I've thought about it. How bad could a peck be? Come on, seriously. Like you'll get in a good couple of pecks, maybe even a few. But I've got jeans on and I've got hands. Where are your thumbs, goose? So yes, we've moved right back to ignorance because I really don't know what I'm talking about. And I don't know how bad a peck is, but I really think that I could take a goose. Is that me being arrogant? I don't know. There's a lot of overconfident white male mediocrity out there. I don't want to contribute to the global supply, but I really do think that I could take a goose. Liberal Catnip says Canada geese will beat you every single time. I can only speak for my ability to totally wail on a US-based goose. I don't know about the Canadian variety. Obi-Mom Kenobi says, just a guess, but most likely the answer to why some people think they can beat a lion is Jesus. That's probably it. They think they can beat Aslan because of Jesus, thus not getting the message of those Narnia books. Multiball says John has apparently never seen or read Cujo. I said I wouldn't fight the dog anyway. Alien Sock Puppet said I had to fight a cat naked once, scary, but I won. Rawr. I kind of want to know more, and yet I really don't. Spartacus DeVille says I fought a goose, but not by choice. That's unfortunate. Tempo Dan says I'd fight a sloth, no sweat. I've heard that they're actually fiercer than they seem. Jaded Zombo says maybe a coyote. They've already been through a lot. And Morfallon with the comment of the day: animals are innocent. I leave them alone and they leave me alone. I think that is something we should all aspire to. Couldn't be more thrilled to welcome back to the show someone I haven't talked to for far too long. One of my favorite people, the host of the Course Correction podcast, Nelufar Hedayat. Welcome back to the Damage Report.
It's a pleasure.
We're very glad to have you here. It's been a whole pandemic since we last spoke, but I do remember one of your previous appearances on the show was to talk about the launch of your podcast, which is now well into its second season. By the time people are seeing this, I believe 9 episodes will be available. And I'm assuming that some of the people watching this interview might not be familiar with our last talk. So tell me a little bit about Course Correction.
Who are these people? I want names, I want a list. Lovely to be on your show again, John. I miss you. Having not been able to travel as much as I do as a filmmaker and a documentarian, I've had to learn to adapt. And podcasts seem to be the way forward. Everyone's got one, so I thought I'll stick my all in. Course Correction season 2 is basically following in the steps of season 1. We go to places, we do things that other people shy away from. And most of that is to do with trying to make sure that you step in to the shoes that you want to see filled. So when we're talking about the plastic crisis, the scourge in our oceans, when we're talking about trying to talk to people we disagree with, or trying to heal the polarization divide that is sweeping across the globe, from India to Indiana through to Iran, wherever you might look, this is common. So season 2 focuses on the polarization issue. And I ended up speaking to people on the right, on the left, on the far right, not so much for the far right, for the far left, and everywhere in between, really trying to really grapple with this idea of like, what has got us to a place where it is easier to sit on the internet and yell at each other than to speak to our neighbors.
Yeah, well, right there, you are perfectly describing my career. But anyway, no, yeah, it's obviously important to speak to people that we disagree with. I notably choose not to do that for the most part, but I am obviously very happy that you do. So, look, you talk about a lot of different topics through the course of just the episodes that have been released, from robots to lockdown, fake news, reparations, free speech, like a billion different things. What is the case where there's been the biggest gap between your position on an issue and the person that you're talking to or profiling in Course Correction?
Muslims, specifically Muslim women people, and the French law, the European law that is trying to decide and police women's bodies. So we started to make an episode on what's creeping into the democracies of Western Europe, whereby they are starting to tell Muslim women that they can and cannot wear headscarves. And these are bills and laws that to some degree have been passed, but the French Senate has shown some way towards wanting to ban the hijab in public spaces for girls and for women. And this episode, I started off telling myself that I don't care. I'm just like, I don't wear that headscarf. It's nothing to do with me. I'm a liberated Western Muslim woman and all this. And by the end of it, I have to say I was so outraged that I cried tears of rage for the first time. And I sat across the mic. You know, it's really hard to talk about something as personal as religion, a headscarf, and a democracy telling you you will be liberated. We will free you by forcing you to take it off. And I started off not caring. And I spoke to a French lawmaker, Aurore Berge, who said she wants to liberate all Muslim women by forcing them to take the hijab off. And you know what? I sat there and I did everything that we at Doha Debates Course Correction does. I opened myself up, I tried to listen, and I learned that actually I have more in common with her than I don't. But the things I disagree on, boy, do I disagree on it. So podcast doesn't shy away from disagreement. What it shies away from is just shouting at one another. I am genuinely sick of turning on CNN, MSNBC, sometimes the BBC and other outlets across the world, and hearing just one person going this, that, and the other, and the poor journalist in the middle going, but there's another side, turning around and like hearing from it's not cool. So we really take this whole don't settle for a divided world thing very seriously at Doha Debates, and Course Correction is a reflection of that. I've had to sit across the laptop from people that I genuinely disagree with. So whether it's the laïcité episode in which we talk about policing women's body and like feminism and liberalism in France, through to, as you mentioned, free speech, like when is free speech not free speech, you know? And I learned a lot about the fact that I actually I don't care about free speech as much as I thought I did. I'm from Afghanistan. I'm born into a country where dressing a certain way, talking a certain way, being a certain sex or gender can be enough to get you killed. And I thought I cared so much about the liberty of free speech. I don't. I think we should curb it. So listen, you're gonna listen to these episodes of Course Correction. I'm gonna change my mind, and I'm gonna be the little piggy that gets out there and gets tossed in to have the fights that you don't want to have. So tune in. It's good.
That is a great tagline for the show. A little piggy gets tossed into gigantic online debates. Anyway, yeah, no, I have all the admiration in the world for that. I like to think that I am still mentally flexible enough and expose myself to enough to gradually shift on some things over time. But I can't necessarily easily identify a couple of gigantic shifts like that. So, more power to you. I do want to talk about one of the big debates that at least here in the US is politically, actually there's two really, and you've talked about both. So one is, at this point in the pandemic, whether in the US or internationally, what exactly the government should or shouldn't be doing. So I know that that's something that you spoke with an individual who's against the lockdown. So tell me a little bit about that.
Can I ask you a question?
Always.
So what is a life worth to you, John?
What is a life, you said, or my life?
Like what is the life of a stranger worth to you? Is it $20,000? Is it 50? Is it 100? Is it one ventilator? Is it two? Should that person have it if they're 80? If there's a 22-year-old waiting in the background who is happy and healthy and has a full life to live? These are the kind of questions that we're tackling in Course Correction. We're not kind of just looking at the idea of what it means to save people in the course of a pandemic. We need not look further than India right now to see exactly what failing to deal with the costs of COVID effectively are. But John, like doctors have to make these decisions on a daily basis. We just don't know about it. Doctors decide who gets the heart, who gets the lung, who should have a viable life after this. And we spoke to Dr. Ludvigsson of Sweden, who says, don't give the ventilator to me or my family, even though we're in our 70s and 80s and more likely to get sick. Give it to the 22-year-old, give it to the 10-year-old. And he made this case that really shocked me to my core because it proved something to me, John. It proved to me that I am capable of changing my mind. So often, right, we're stuck in our silos because we know we're right. Sometimes reaching consensus is more important than being right. This is what I'm learning as I'm going through this journey of making this podcast. And they're bloody hard lessons to learn, mate, honestly. But if anyone's gonna do it, it's gonna be me. The Course Correction, the first episode, I interview my dad. Who's
what?
Yeah, he's at serious risk of catching COVID. And my dad's not rich, he's a poor man, he runs a laundrette. And he took the risk to go out into his community because he knew his community revolved around him. Everyone needs their clothes washed. And when he opened up the laundrette again, there was a sense of like togetherness. So he took the risk for his own personal health to open up the store. So there's all these like really like emotional, thoughtful analysis that we do in the podcast. And really, I find them a roller coaster. I mean, the one we're making right now, on the conflict in the Middle East, in Palestine and Israel, is one that me and my producers and Foreign Policy Magazine, who are the production company we're working with, we're battling every day to try and get it right. Stepping into these things. But if we're gonna talk about polarization, why not tackle the biggest polarizing issue in the world, right? So we're really getting our teeth stuck in.
Wow, certainly timely. Now I don't know. So as I said, by the time people are seeing this, 9 episodes will be out, 8 are out as we're recording it. How much more season 2 is there, and what are some of the big topics that you're looking forward to covering in the future?
Yes, so there'll be 12 episodes in total. You guys can definitely binge series 1 right now. They're very, very different in tone. I did a lot of growing up between them. But John, you know what I love about your show, and we've spoken about this a lot when I've met you in LA, is you do not shy away from your feelings. You put the emotional kind of intelligence that you have on your sleeve and you put it on the show. And this is why I love the work that you do and the stuff that you make. I mean, honestly, you and I can vibe on that, but the true expense of being a journalist today is that you cannot not have a view on things anymore. Those days of like impartiality for the sake of impartiality, are well and truly gone. And you've got to be smarter than that. So we don't get away with saying, oh, well, our line is this, or our organization says that. We have to know what's going on. Our fingers have to be on the pulse, and we have to be responsive. I go back to this thing that my boss, Amjad Atala, our managing director, says all the time, and he repeats it. It's our tagline: it's don't settle for a divided world, right? And the world is ever more divided, ever more polarized, and that's what we're trying to tackle in course correction. We don't have solutions, right? Like, who does? I'm not gonna 24 minutes or 30 minutes, but we can sure as heck give you a different perspective. For example, the climate change episode that we made, I'm not gonna sit here and argue with some idiot about whether climate change is real or not. It's real. But we can talk about the incendiary, inflammatory science and some of the stuff that scientists say that you're like, oh my God, the world is ending. And then on the other side, they're like, nah, we got about 70, 80 years to make a plan. It's like, scientists, get your shit together, lads. What are we doing on this? What's the narrative? Is the world already on fire, or can I save it? So this is kind of like where I'm at with it at the moment.
Interesting. Yeah, and the distinction between those two positions is pretty important. I mean, to me, it's a wash, but you eat healthy. You might reach 70 or 80 more years. So to you, that really matters. Anyway.
John, not.
Well, look, it's always great to catch up with you, especially when you're doing such fascinating work. And everyone watching this needs to check it out. Obviously, the podcast Course Correction available pretty much everywhere. I use Pocket Cast, but feel free to check your podcast browser of choice. And Nelufar, always glad to have you on the show, and hopefully you'll be back in LA sometime soon.
Yes, catch you there.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.